Well, hello everyone. Does anybody else notice the summer flying by? If you are here watching the show, you know we do the last Tuesday of every month, and so that means it's already the end of July. I'm not sure when that happened. So I'm Langdon White. I'm the host of the show. This is KBE Insider. And what we do with the show is we try to interview people who are involved in the Kubernetes community somehow, and talk to them about what they see coming next in Kubernetes. And why do we do this? Because if you've ever worked with open source before, you understand that product managers often do not know what is coming, because the challenge with open source is that even if somebody tells you you can't do something, you can spend your weekend and do it anyway. So as a result, it's often better to actually talk to the people who are actually involved. And so my co-host today is Daniel O, who you've all seen before. But Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the rundown. Hey, everybody. I'm Daniel. I'm working for Red Hat as a developer advocate. And also, I'm really love to have some conversation with platform engineers and then SRE. I'm super happy to be back here. And then it'll be a great time to have some conversation around the Open Data Harbor today.
And Anish, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Anish Asthana. I'm a senior software engineer at Red Hat who's been working on cloud native things for I don't know, 5, 6 years now, straight out of college, actually. Um, Last couple of years for me have been focused mainly on machine learning on the cloud. So more from a platform perspective versus actual data science workloads, right? Like just enabling them, I guess is what I'd say. Most recently, I've been more involved with distributed computing, but again, that's very much still in the machine learning wheelhouse.
That's cool.
And so we one of the things we always like to ask people, right, is what got you into kind of the open source world in the first place?
Um, this is gonna, well, this is not gonna be as interesting as some of the answers you've had before, but I'd say free pizza. Red Hat had a hiring event on campus, and I'd never heard of them before. That I knew our machines used CentOS and like the labs. I was like, okay, free pizza, I'll go check it out. Um, I talked to some people there, got an internship, and today I can't actually imagine working in a company that doesn't do open source. I have friends, classmates, whatever, who work at companies where they can't publish anything or like you talk about this stuff. I'm like, that's sounds insane.
Yeah, it really corrupts you. It's funny because I mean, I spent 15 years or something working in industry in proprietary, kind of software world, especially in consulting, which was even worse. Like they didn't even want to let you retain the IP, much less, kind of make it public. You always were doing it for a client. But after I don't know how many years at Red Hat, I can't imagine working any other way now. It's really quite like interesting how much it changes your kind of perspective. So for everybody who's out there listening, if you haven't contributed to anything in the open source world, we recommend it. It really does it makes you a better programmer. It makes you better at playing well with others, those kinds of things. And you should definitely try it out. So kind of the next follow-on question to that, of course, is what brought you towards Kubernetes?
Yeah. So that's a great question, right? Boring answer. I interned on a team that was the OpenShift business unit, right? So we ended up just breathing Kubernetes there. Over time, I've actually started seeing the value of Kubernetes. Initially, I was like, okay, what is this thing, right? Like we have virtual machines, why am I bothering with it? But as I spent some time running an internal platform actually for Red Hat, the benefits of containers really stood out to me, right? Being able to Kubernetes just takes care of so much stuff for you, and it made at least my operations like much easier than what it previously used to be. I don't want to turn this into a talk like, oh yeah, here's why you should use Kubernetes, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
not what people are
yeah.
here for, but
Yeah,
I
for
could if
sure.
you want to.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think that's a common experience, right? Especially if you start out in containers, kind of working with containers, you quickly realize that not being able to orchestrate them is really a pain in the butt, even like on your laptop. right? Like, and so, that's, it basically explains the popularity of like Docker Compose, right? Is that, a huge, it makes it so much easier to kind of orchestrate things. But then as soon as you want it's something a little more complicated, right? That's when you kind of step into things like Kubernetes. But yeah, it's kind of cool. So I know you primarily are responsible for what's called the Open Data Hub, or that team or whatever. Can you give a little bit of background on what that is?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you like the whole historical context behind it, right? Like, when I joined Red Hat full time, our team was working on running an internal platform for like machine learning workloads. Previously, you had lots of different teams running their own like sort of data platforms, and it just didn't make sense because everyone had their own bespoke implementations. So we started building that out, again, all running on Kubernetes. Over time, we realized that these problems are actually relevant to the community, right? And Red Hat does open source, so we said, okay, like let's throw this out in the open. And I realize I haven't actually talked about what it is. Beyond that, it's a machine learning platform, right? So kind of the primary idea behind it is that with any machine learning workload, right? Like you don't have just data science or a model that's being served, right? You have a lot of different things that go into your overall workflow, right? You have to have your data ingestion, you have to have data storage, you have to have some way to like automatically run workflows to clean up data, to train your models, right? For your actual data scientists to experiment with data. I keep saying data scientists, anyone, right? Like we spoke around the data, come up with models, and you want to train them, you want to serve them. And even once you've served your models, that's not it, right? You have to monitor your models. You have to make sure that they're sort of behaving as you expect them to be, right? Like if they're hitting their sort of target metrics, whatever that may be. And that's really a pain in the butt to run, right? Like it's not easy to set up, and there's lots of great open source projects that do portions of it, but like sort of running it in one unified story is like it's much more challenging. And that's really what the Open Data Hub is doing, is that we've seen like here are some core user stories or workflows that we think should be supported well. We've looked at open source projects that are kind of very popular for those use cases, right? So like you have Jupyter notebooks, right? How do you run that on the cloud? You have Kubeflow pipelines for running repetitive workflows, right? You have Tecton, all these kinds of things, right? So how do we build them, bring them together into kind of a cohesive user experience, right? Because as of today, if I was to install each one individually, my users would hate me because the experience is not the same, right? The UI is very different across the board. So how do you bring that together into something that's easy to deploy and then also easy to use for a data scientist, right? You don't want to have people learning new UIs constantly and then going back and forth between different pages. You want to make it like sort of easy. A lot of words. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I got one question. Maybe, yeah.
Langdon, you're muted, I think.
I was muted, yeah. But go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so I got one question actually. Yeah, I can reduce the edge like a developer perspective. So if I understand correctly, it's an open data hub, like a provider, some of the like a AI platform, and then data scientist stuff. And then as the developer standpoint, I just wondering, is there any kind of like a consumable API for developer to use like some AI like a specification or implementation? For example, like a generative AI, like a ChatGPT or a Copilot, and then things like that. It's some kind of platform to generate like a AI machine learning. However, like a developer is some user perspective. I want to use the kind of API as a consumer rather than producer. So yeah, I just wondering, yeah, is there any kind of such a thing in the Open Data Hub, like some feature or service, even if some kind of roadmap?
Yeah. So the Open Data Hub is like there's an operator for it, which we're actually re-architecting right now, and I can probably talk about that later. And sort of to your point, right, about like consuming or interacting with APIs, you can serve models using the Open Data Hub, right? So I, as a user, could train a model, or a producer, right, could train a model and serve it up for anyone to interact with and use. We've had a number of like very interesting use cases come up where like people have sort of models and they have lots of other APIs trying to like sort of wrapping that and then interacting with the models and getting insight from them. You may or may not have seen some demos actually at Summit that involve the Open Data Hub.
Yeah, I saw that.
So yeah.
Perfect.
So, but what you're, I mean, to further answer kind of Daniel's question, right? So the idea is that if like you have an organization and you want to offer, some of these models essentially to your customers, and those customers might be like internal users or it could be external users. But the idea is that here's a platform that is going to, because one of the challenges I think is that you often have data scientists who are doing the work of kind of creating your AI or whatever, right? Your models. And they are not, generally speaking, trained as like total software engineers, or especially not kind of operators, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you make that model available that isn't, oh yeah, download this model and run this Python script on your command line? Which, I see a lot at BU from students is that, oh yeah, it's all done. It's all deployed and everything. And you can just use it. All you got to do is download this, 50 gig model and, install Python and these libraries and, run it and it'll work just fine. So that's really the kind of problem that Open Data Hub's trying to solve, right?
Yeah. That's part of the problem, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was going to kind of ask a little bit more for background is like, so if I'm, kind of an organization and I'm running some of these models or, whatever, like what do you think the trigger point is where it becomes worthwhile to, potentially deploy something like Open Data Hub? Because it's like I was saying with containers and Kubernetes, right? There's a kind of a threshold you get to that says, oh, now you really need orchestration before it's going to really burn you. Do you have a sense of where that is in like with Open Data Hub?
That's a great question, I'd say, right? Like, so I'd say one thing that we've really tried to do is make it as easy as possible for you to set up or install, right? So if you have cluster admin, or if you know someone who has cluster admin on a cluster, you can go ahead and just install it today. Speaking personally, I think it's when you start working with more than a few people on your project, right? Like, everyone has different ways of like, okay, I want to deploy, work on my models, right? Yeah, you can work on, do data science work on your own machine. Probably shouldn't, but you could, right? Like when you start getting into a team that's more than a couple of people that has a shared environment where they need to be running the notebooks, and then they need a consistent way to serve models, right? Like where you're out of like the student project POC stage to like something that like, oh, like this is something people might actually care about, or where you are working on a problem that people care about. I'd say that's where it matters, right? Like, if today I knew nothing about Open Data Hub, I barely knew data science, probably overkill. But if I know a little bit about it and I am aware of all the different problems that can come up with a data science project, I think it 100% makes sense to use it.
So what I'm hearing is that it's almost people based rather than problem based, in the sense of like, like I was saying kind of with Kubernetes, like the trigger is that you can't keep track, right? Whereas it sounds more like with Open Data Hub, it's more collaboration enablement, so if you got two people sitting in the same room together, maybe you don't need it. But if you got, 5 people spread around the world, it's probably a different story. So I think that's always a good thing to kind of know, right? Because then you can have an eye out for the triggers when it might come in handy. So I wanted to ask next, what is the user type you're really looking to support? Who's your primary customer, as it were, from a user persona perspective?
So I'd say like there's really two main ones, right? One would be your platform administrators who don't want to go crazy, right? Like running all these separate things is challenging, really challenging. So we want to make it as easy for them as possible, right? To manage, like what resources are available to their internal customers, right? What RBAC is set up, those kinds of things, right? Or even what projects are available for people to use. Um, and that's kind of like the boring backend side of it, right? But then from a user perspective today, I think our main focus is data scientists, right? We don't want people having to, uh, anyone who's worked with Kubernetes or most stuff in the cloud, right? Like, you're just going to write YAML for days, right? Like, it's just YAML. Like, we don't want to have people forced to do that. We don't want to force people to go into the command lines and like mess around with things like that. And we want to like really focus on data scientists using workflows that they're familiar with in a way that makes sense for them. Right? We don't want to force people to learn things that don't really align with their skill set. Very long way of saying data scientist, right? Like a data scientist who doesn't care about some of that underlying stuff.
Yeah, there is just one case. I mean, so a lot of people heard about like a new role and responsibility around the AI platform, such as like a DevOps engineer and then data scientists and then like a data engineers.
Yeah.
So would you really be explain on what kind of responsibility and role for each like a data engineer and like a data scientist in terms of how they can use this open data hub with some like some features or like some specific role and responsibility.
Yeah, and I can probably talk through some projects that I've seen happen recently doing that, right? So um, data scientist is the easiest one, so I'll start with that. The work is probably the most challenging. You look at the data, right? Like you go into your Jupyter notebooks, you want to access data that's stored somewhere. You experiment with it, and then you try running some models on top of, or training some models using that data. You look at the numbers, and then you say, okay, like this seems good enough. And then you save your model to storage, and then serve it out. Data engineers would be more focused on keeping the data stored efficiently, right? Data ingestion pipelines. You may have workflows that you're running regularly to compact and clean data, right? So you may have data come in as like JSON daily or whatever, right? And then you have a job running every day, every hour, every week, which compacts all that data into one single Parquet file, right? Or something similar. So like kind of that's where data engineers would focus. I have a really nice slide floating on somewhere else, which I should have brought with me today, but like it really clearly demarcates like where those guys would fit in. That being said, right, like that's where they primarily play. That doesn't mean that's where it ends, right? Like you may have data scientists, right, pipelines that will, or pipelines workflows are used interchangeably. You may have them write pipelines that will regularly learn to retrain the model, right? Like they say, okay, the model is like this. We've had X new data come in. Let's make sure that the model is being kept up to date and trained. Then you mentioned like the DevOps or like I think internal is also MLOps engineer, right? And they're more worried about like sort of that bringing more software engineering and dev practices to this whole cycle. Personally, I feel like it's kind of just like just another term people have made up, right? Like it's really just a DevOps engineer, but
Yeah.
you're just working in MLOps, machine learning
That's
systems of
because
MLOps.
Because they
most
can do
people
anything.
well, it's because most people who have a DevOps engineer title don't
Yeah.
actually do DevOps. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a
Yeah.
part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go read the Phoenix Project if you haven't already.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's really good to know because I've been asked a lot, specifically. I mean, a lot of people are actually asking me around the AI platform and then AI technology, and then they're really looking forward to some like how to change their processes and then organization when they adopt AI platforms. Like they wants to create a new role and responsibility rather than just like a fancy DevOps engineer title. Yeah, that's really good to know. Thanks.
And then you also have site reliability engineers, right? Like where do the lines
Yeah.
Untitled Friend.
So that's why they really want to like bring up new AI workflow as a part of their organization, and then they also need a new role or like some responsibility to handle that. That's really good.
So I guess you're kind of wondering is like, is this creating new specialties that are needed inside of, an organization, or do your existing skills kind of apply?
Like I can give, so like I did a master's in like with a focus on machine learning, right? So I think having some data science background has helped me a good amount with all the work I'm doing, right? Like Ena's us running the internal platform because I was able to, at least at a high level, right? Like speak the language the SMEs were speaking, right? Like they'd say, oh, like we're trying to do this thing with this model, right? And like here's where it's breaking, or in just like high level terminology, like being able to understand that helped me develop solutions the right way for them. Where sometimes people complain like, hey, like I'm trying to do something with PyTorch or blah 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 to like train this model and like it isn't working. And I wouldn't start completely from scratch. Like I'd get a jump start versus someone who had no idea what's going on with the data science thing. To me, I feel like, being a generalist is like always been important, right? Like you need to be able to pick up new technologies and like data science, but machine learning is just another evolution of that.
So kind of related to that. So what do you consider your job? Do you consider yourself kind of not what you were trained for or what you could do, but just like kind of, on your day to day, do you consider yourself more a data scientist? Do you consider yourself more a software engineer? Do you consider yourself more like a site reliability engineer or an operator? I often say for short.
So today I'd say more of a software engineer. If you asked me this like 1 or 2 years ago, I would have said operator or site reliability engineer. In recent years, we focused more on like building out the upstream and like open source community around the Open Data Hub. And so with that, like I've transitioned more over to like just developing the project. One of the really nice things like I know working on open source and then like in this space is that there's a lot of projects, right? There's a lot of communities with a lot of smart people in them that I get to work with and contribute to and then like learn from, which and like tooting the open source horn, right? Like,
yeah, what they used to call like a force multiplier, right?
yeah.
Because all the terminology that we use in tech comes from the military. So you said you were in the midst of re-architecting Open Data Hub. Like, why? And what are you hoping it's going to bring to the table?
Oh yeah. So the Open Data Hub originally started as a couple of Ansible scripts we ran to like spin up some pods on Kubernetes. This is like 5 years ago, right? They're like, oh, like, hey, here's this thing called operators. We should do that. And they had something called Ansible operators. So we said, okay, this is going to be the least amount of work for us to do. So let's just make an Ansible operator. While a great way to get familiar with operator concepts, Ansible didn't give us a lot of flexibility with what we want to do, right? Like versus just having something like in Go code. So after I said, okay, like let's make this a Go-based operator. We did that, and we may have taken a lot of like that Ansible mindset over into like, oh, we just do all the things and like make something called a meta operator where we try to deploy lots of different things and like keep our platform as generic as possible. One thing that really hurt us there was that we could do a lot of things okay, but like we weren't being able to really do anything well. And like really focus in on like doing something very intelligent with like Jupyter notebooks or with anything, any sort of special logic. The most recent like iteration of this re-architecture now, which is ongoing, is we are really paring down the components that are deployed by the Open Data Hub as core components, and we're saying, okay, here are like really the core technologies that we think you should care about. Here's all this other stuff you could deploy, and like that'll be kind of nice to do, but like we're not going to worry about that as a core component of what we're doing. And by doing so, we're being able to invest more time into doing things intelligently, right? Like where if you need advanced logic for dependencies or anything of that sort, we can do that. Yeah, so I mean, I'm very excited about this re-architecture actually, because historically we've really struggled with how many different things we were trying to do, and now we're trying to do fewer things better.
Gotcha. And so how do you kind of see those things going forward? Like, is it, for lack of a better term, are you considering something more like a plugin architecture, like a way for other people to participate in a formal way, in a sense?
Yeah, I'd say so. So again, in the past, right, we said if someone said, "Oh, we should deploy to the Open Data Hub," they just say yes, and then we like, "Okay, yeah, sure, we deploy it." Now we are we built out a more formal community and sort of acceptance process, right, for like these plugins where people can propose them and like the relevant SIGs for like ABC feature, and then why we should care about this technology. And then we'll work on either tightly integrating it with the operator or, like you said, plugin architecture where they can plug into the UI and like have some sort of lightly supported ways to use the technology.
Gotcha.
So a mix of both, right? Like you probably start off as like a high level plugin and then really nail down over time.
I gotcha. So I'm gonna ask this question kind of twice in a sense, but so both now and post re-architecture, and I think the answer may be different depending. But basically, is like, can I run this on my laptop? Is this something I'd want to run on my laptop? In the sense that, if especially, I come from a software engineering side, so I sometimes have a hard time with doing the data science side because I'm like, I can't like I can do something in a Jupyter notebook, but ultimately it'll be in straight Python at some point. So I guess what I'm kind of wondering is like, would it be worthwhile, especially as a training exercise, to kind of set it up on my laptop so that when I'm going and working on this stuff, when I want to deploy it to production, right, or I want to throw it over the wall, or start moving it into something that's not a toy, is it something that's got is it from a resource requirements perspective something I can run on Kind or something on my laptop?
That's a loaded question, right? Like if you have a really, really kick-ass laptop, you can run anything on it.
6020.
Exactly. You could run it on your laptop. As long as you run containers on your laptop, right? Like it's just an image that you deploy on. Now, depending on how many different like portions of the Open Data Hub you're running, you'll quickly run into resource limitations, right? Like if you say, okay, I just want notebooks and the Open Data Hub, we can do that easily. If you're just UI and notebooks, okay, fine. And you say, okay, now I want to do pipelines, and if you're going to do model serving, then you're going to start getting struggling on your laptop. My personal opinion is I probably wouldn't run it on my laptop, unless again, like I'm actively developing and like I don't feel like going through like a Kubernetes cluster or kind or whatever.
Yeah, and this goes back to the earlier question, right? It's like it really makes sense when you have 4 or 5 people. One person is even less than that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I gotcha. Do you think the same will be true post the re-architecture, or like with and if it kind of comes down to it's people based, right? Like maybe it's unrelated to the kind of the software overhead as much as it's just related to it's not bringing a lot of value for an individual.
Yeah, exactly, right. Like that's it. Like it's not bringing a lot of value for an individual.
Okay.
Which is why I'd say running on your laptop probably overkill. Alternatively, the way you could look at it is like, say, I am someone who's like, oh, I want to do machine learning, right? But I don't know everything that I need to deploy and run for it. If you just install the Open Data Hub, you get all the core components that you need for like a machine learning use case, right? Like or for a project. So kind of from a learning perspective, it could still be useful for you because coming in, you don't know what you don't know. And Open Data Hub can sort of help you with at least some of those problems or questions.
Right, kind of knowing what the questions to ask are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the nice things about kind of pipelines in general, right? In a sense, is that they tell you a lot about how stuff is supposed to work, assuming somebody who knew what they were doing set up the pipeline.
Exactly.
Which is, always a question mark. Cool. Yeah, that was kind of what I was kind of curious about. Because it is a problem I have run into before, and so that's why I was wondering if it was like if it made a lot of sense or if it was more of a independent thing. And it sounds like, I mean, what we should really do, right, at some place like Boston University, right, is like have kind of central IT set up an Open Data Hub,
Exactly.
and then students or whoever could go and use the feature set. But it would be managed at a kind of institutional level.
Yeah, exactly. And
even if we're not working together, right? Even if we're working on individual projects or whatever.
Yeah, and like I mean, I think that's one of the things I went to BU at like Boston University as well, right? Like, and that's one of the things I found most lacking was sort of like this sort of centralized infrastructure that I could really easily interact with for my data science classes, right? Like we had a lot of like that old school software engineering stuff, where I was like, okay, Jupyter notebooks, and like you're working in teams now, and like good luck. And I was like, I barely know Python. You're asking me to like do this, like do these kinds of things. I've actually heard of some like people using the Open Data Hub for classes where someone set up a cluster and they even set up very strict resource requirements, right? They found that their students don't need to have like gigs and gigs of memory, so like they set very small things with aggressive timeouts that no one's abusing the platform. And I mean, they found it worked well for the classic teaching.
One of the things that I learned recently is GitHub code spaces. You can actually have GitHub code spaces use Jupyter Notebook instead of VS Code.
That's neat.
And you can set it as your default preference as well. So I might be using GitHub Classroom combined with GitHub Jupyter Notebook code spaces. I don't know what you call it. For one of my classes in the fall to kind of solve some of that same problem. It's GitHub, so it's not open source, but it is a really nice way to get a Jupyter Notebook. And for me, it's also a good way to do like assignment distribution, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is what does Open Data Hub, or is it just not a problem that it's trying to solve? What does it do about the data, right? Like one of the huge challenges you have, particularly like I said, coming from the software engineering side, where everything is in source control except for the most important thing, which is my data. So where does Open Data Hub try to start to solve that? What or do you have any recommendations to kind of data scientists out there or software engineers out there who are working with a lot of data about how to do source control and not check in multi-gig files into Git?
I don't. So this is something we are actively thinking about. There are a bunch of open source technologies for like data versioning and all that, right? I think one of the projects I think of is Pachyderm. I know it's a project or a company, right? But like there are open communities and projects around that stuff. But it's really hard, right? Like I have seen anywhere from like someone says, okay, we have different folders with different versions on them. Do like something, like APIs that built out around the storage, right? So like you have your S3 or whatever compatible storage, and you build out an API on top of that, which does the versioning for you. I will say this is something like the Open Data Hub is actually actively thinking about, is sort of versioning both from a data perspective and then also from a model perspective, right? You may have different versions of your model over time that are trained either on different data sets, or just with different parameters. And how do they, like how do you keep track? How do you version them? This is somewhere on the roadmap for the next year or two. So if you're interested, stay tuned or definitely engage.
Well, one we're looking at, if you haven't heard of it, is called DVC, or data version control. And I think the idea of it is it kind of more integrates directly with your source control tools. My problem so far as well is I haven't found a particularly good solution that doesn't require both a server and client. And getting something onto a server a lot of the time is the challenge. So that's not as useful, but it is definitely worth checking out. I'll throw that one in the chat too, because it's been around for quite a while and it does purport to solve some of these problems.
And this is not something I've heard of. Admittedly, I've not spent a ton of time thinking about data versioning recently, but I can almost imagine one of my team members is screaming at me from behind the scenes. What are you saying?
Exactly. It's a problem for me a lot. And so, it's one of those things I've been, the only, even just for like a student class, right? Like the data is not privileged or anything. It's just, it's big. And I want to stick it somewhere that I can make it accessible to the students without having to, mail around a zip file, and so that's, there's various ways to do that. But I haven't found any particularly nice ones. And that's why I was kind of asking the question. So, Daniel, did you have another question you wanted to ask? Or
yeah, for sure. Yes, as always, in case a lot of people are really interested in the Open Data Hub after this, like a KBE Insider, what is the best like a practice or process is for like a developer and a data scientist, even if like a platform engineer, in terms of contributing back to this Open Data Hub, for example, creating new component or something other stuff?
Yeah, so lots of different ways, right? Like the first place I'd point anyone at is Slack. Like we have a community Slack for the Open Data Hub, where the entire team lives, like the entire community lives, right? We've had people sort of join in from there, and find things that they're interested in, right? Like it doesn't make sense for you to like just throw stuff over willy-nilly.
Can they add a hashtag with the Anish in there when they ask some questions in Slack channel?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, definitely. I can always direct you at someone who can actually answer your questions. But no, yeah, like 100%. Like I think the Slack is quite active. We also have like our GitHub pages and like the community, sort of like we have a ODH community repo, which I will drop in here as well. But I'd say the main place to interact is Slack. Over there, we have
maybe
links
goes
to
the Slack invite link too. That'd be handy.
Yes, that's. I have to monitor, so I'm like desperately pulling that up right now.
Is it on the Data Hub, Open Data Hub, like website?
Yeah, it should be. I can't figure out how to type it into the chat.
I can do it if you, yeah.
So like this is one place, right? So one of the things we've recently started doing is like we've established SIGs for all the different spaces that the Open Data Hub is playing in. SIG stands for Special Interest Group. So we have something that's focused on developer experiences, kind of the front end side, right? We have something for platform, which is more generically applicable to the entire Open Data Hub. Then we have stuff around, the different working groups for like different backend components, like for model serving or for pipelines.
That'd be awesome.
Hey, wow, you guys just found all the links. Like
Yeah, I just find out some there are the community meetings, which is really awesome. So
Yeah.
everybody interested in like helping in the meeting, in the community meeting, they can like ask any kind of question, and then they will find out some of the opportunity how to contribute back to the community in the end.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, again, like I think some of the like, great things are open source, right? Like we do everything out in the open, and all of our meetings are out in the open. So um, anything you're interested in, you can do.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Also, I can't resist to ask this kind of questions because, yeah, I've got to ask some of the Reddit customers. They actually watch this KBE Insider on live, but also like watching record the video as well. And then so some of the people actually um, haven't heard about like a OpenShift AI. It's something like a AI, like a enterprise product environment. And then, so can you really explain what is the differences between Open Data Hub and then like a OpenShift AI, which is a similar thing, like a AI standpoints?
Yeah, so I can talk to some of them, like cut me off if at any point I'm getting into too much detail. So we have the Open Data Hub, which is the community project, right? Like anyone can participate. Um, and then historically, like we built out a downstream like Red Hat product around it called Roads, which is Red Hat OpenShift Data Science. Right. I think that's actually what they demoed at Summit was using Roads for a lot of these use cases I just talked about. So that's kind of like the main offering today. As we've gathered more, like as more interest has come up, we've sort of, I say we, right? Like this being like a sort of rebranding of sorts to something called OpenShift AI, which is broader than roads, right? Like roads is like, okay, I want to open data up, I want the whole kitchen sink. But not every customer wants the kitchen sink, right? Like there may be someone who wants just pipelines, right? Or they want just model serving, and that's perfectly fine, right? So what do we call products under that umbrella? And those will be, whatever they may be called, right? But like that umbrella itself is OpenShift AI.
That's
And
cool. Yeah,
so
that's really good to know.
is sorry, is it offering models or is it helping you build models or
Helping you build models, right? Like we, I don't want to say anything too prescriptive, right? Like we don't, or as far as I'm aware, we don't offer models or like train models for you, anything of that sort, right? Like our focus is more so on the platform level where we allow you to build your models, to build and serve your models and all of that.
Gotcha. Okay. So are you, is OpenShift AI is the I mean, whether it's open source or not, but like is there an upstream or is it kind of the same, like, because there's Open Data Hub, right, and Roads. Is there something the equivalent with OpenShift AI, or is it kind of like the same thing in a sense?
I'd say, speaking as just an engineer, right? I'd say OpenShift AI I'd compare more to Open Data Hub, or like the Open Data Hub organization or community, right? And then within that, you may have specific components. And then one installation path of all of these components is roads, which is install all the components. So I'd map OpenShift AI to Open Data Hub. And again, like all of this stuff is upstream first all the way, right? Like everything happens out in the open. So um, there are no other organizations I'm aware of or projects that I'm aware of.
Yeah. That's why I was just that, because it has OpenShift in the name. That's why I wasn't sure if it was like
Yeah.
the downstream product, that there would also be, some sort of upstream.
It's all Open Data Hub, I'd say, is the upstream for
Yeah.
everything.
And then
Okay.
just to FYI, the OpenShift AI is a brand new name of OpenShift Data Scientist, aka ROS. So OpenShift AI is a brand new name of OpenShift Data Science. So it's a more like a coverage or leverage not only like a platform but also like a more consumable API for not only developer but also like a bunch of the other like role and then users. So that's why we changed the name from roles to OpenShift AI.
So, but if I wanted, if my company went and bought OpenShift AI, right, and then deployed it or whatever, and I wanted a new feature to show up, I should go contribute it at Open Data Hub.
Yes,
And
exactly,
and
yeah.
assuming it gets approved and all that other jazz, right? But
Yeah.
that's the path that I would get my feature or my bug fix or whatever to land.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. Like everything goes through Open Data Hub first.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. That's why that's what I was kind of really asking for is like, if I want something to show up in OpenShift AI, how do I make that happen? Right. Because
Well, first you create an issue for it on GitHub, and then the maintainers have to approve. But yeah, no, I'm kidding. Yeah.
right.
all Open
But
Data
it's on Open Data Hub, not
Yeah.
there's no that's kind of
That
always
makes
looking for. Okay, that's cool. And so what do you think is going to be, the next big change or new feature or whatever in the next 3 to 6 months that you think is most compelling, like that's the most interesting for you, not necessarily for your users or whatever, but for you? What do you think is the most interesting thing that's coming?
Yeah, so one thing I already talked about was the re-architecture of the operator. From a developer standpoint, I'm very happy, like very excited about this, because it just makes all of our lives a lot easier. And then on something I'm personally working on is sort of distributed workloads functionality for the Open Data Hub. So, this is involving projects using like Gray and something called Portflare. And really, this is offering capabilities for like your data scientists or your data engineers to spin up jobs and like job scheduling and those kinds of things, but like using something like Gray. For those who aren't aware, Ray is comparable to Spark, where it's kind of like this distributed Apache Spark, not B Spark. That is comparable to, it's a distributed engine, right? So you can submit a job, it's spin up like 6 different workers, and it'll like schedule stuff onto them. And Ray is kind of a more Kubernetes native Spark. At least that's how I personally think of it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm also looking for the link to Ray to drop in the chat.
And yeah, so there is the Ray project. Yep, that's exactly, yeah.
So something else to check out. I swear to God, Spark is like the most common name for anything. There's even a Boston. There's an organization within the city of Boston that's also called Spark. So
really,
yeah. So it's like it's everywhere, and we always have to clarify. But yeah, I totally hear you.
I mean, right now I just dropped the comparison with BU Spark because I was talking to someone the other day and I said, oh yeah, like I'm working on this thing called Ray, which is cloud native Spark. And they're like, what the heck does BU have to do with what you're working on?
Yeah. I normally have to clarify the other way, so most of the time.
Okay.
The particularly entertaining thing is I'm actually going to offer a course in the spring that is going to cover Spark. So that should be entertaining while I talk about Spark.
You should do it with Ray instead.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should. Then I wouldn't have the name collision.
Yeah.
So, Daniel, did you have any more questions you wanted to ask?
Not really. Anish touched a lot of stuff really interesting, and then curious about the AI platform stuff. And then also I'm more like a developer side, and then I'm really wondering, like everybody's saying like a LLM and then like a Gen AI stuff, and I'm really looking forward to like an Open Data Hub, like some core key role, make it a more Gen AI platform. Like as a part of the Kubernetes native stuff, and to probably like some cloud native platforms eventually in the end. Yeah.
So I would say like the Open Data Hub today would probably support those kinds of workflows, right? Where we can help you build out your LLM, right? Like if you're gonna train like a large language model and serve it through Open Data Hub components, you could do that. I guess Daniel, you're more referring to like just having generated like those capabilities built into the Open Data Hub where it does something machine learning for you. Like wait,
I think for me, at least, it's a little bit of both. I mean, one kind of related question is like, have you considered how you might integrate Llama, because they're quasi open license, into Open Data Hub, such that when I, if I wanted to check that box when I install Open Data Hub, I could now offer Llama as a service to my, to my users, whatever that means, or any of the other tools like that.
That's definitely a very interesting idea. I've not thought about it at all. Like all I've done with Llama is like, okay, like there's a website I can go to now and like type in my questions and then have it fix them for me. So that's
right.
Yeah.
And I totally hear you. I just, especially, kind of the increasing, let's say like availability of, like at least quasi open, pre-built models, partially offering this. One of the things I go back to is like there's a project in Apache land that's been around for a long time called Mahout, right? And it's a bunch of basically crowdsourcing AI like tools that you can kind of just use, right? And they're not the model side so much as like, to kind of, it's the whole kit and caboodle to build one, right? They don't have the pain level of like an LLM from how much data they need and all that jazz, but it's kind of a nice packaging, right? It's kind of a nice way to kind of say, oh, I just go here and I kind of look for the one I want, right? Or the kind of thing I want to use, right? And then I can kind of go off to the races.
That's something interesting that like again we've talked about with some customers, has been around like foundation models, right? So what happens is like what a foundation model is, you have a company like, I don't know, IBM or Google or something who has all the money in the world, right? Like they just go and train like these massive large language models, right? So like for example, in Greece, I'm like, okay, I have a model that I've taught English, right? So it understands English. If I ask it something, it can answer that, right? But that's all it does, right? Like it knows languages. Now, as a customer, right? Like say if I am in the business of, if I sell a product, right? Like I can take this foundation model which knows English. I'll give it all of my data so it understands my specific use case, and then I can create a chatbot around it so that it can answer questions related to support for my product, right? So if I have, I don't know, OpenShift, right? Like I can give it all the OpenShift customer support articles, and then it can start answering questions about OpenShift, like common OpenShift issues. The process of getting it from like, like that base model into something that works for you is called fine tuning, and that's actually something we are trying to build out like infrastructure for support for in the Open Data Hub. Is like, okay, how do we make those fine tuning workflows work and like easy?
Gotcha. So I would like go check the box that says, I want to use the, BARD or whatever. And then, and kind of that would be the beginning of the pipeline in Open Data Hub. And then I would write my code, whatever that means exactly, and put it in the fine tuning layer. And then out the other side, I could offer an API that was for my chatbot or whatever.
Yeah. something like that. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be very cool. Like I said, kind of the, one of the things I actually really miss from kind of the really old days of OpenShift, but is kind of sort of similarly there now, is kind of like the offering of other services through like, kind of marketplace, an Open Data Hub marketplace of those kinds of things might be also interesting. Especially if you could, you knew what the status of their licensing was, for example.
Yeah.
But on that note, and before ChatGPT just takes over the rest of the show, thanks so much for coming. And maybe we should wrap it up here.
Yeah, because we are all living in the Boston area, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Anish, thank you again seriously for coming. We appreciate kind of getting more, kind of understanding, exploring the space around Kubernetes and how it's growing. And for all you data people out there, or anybody who needs to support data people out there, you should check out Open Data Hub. And we'll see you next month.
Sounds
Well,
cool.
thanks for having me.
Thank you.